Welcome to Megan and the Thunderdome, a Citizen Assembly meeting where we test ideas and hone debate skills in a real-life social political arena with a goal of holistic balance. If you'd like to participate, find out how in our podcast description. Let's start with a round of introductions from our panelists. We've got about 30 seconds apiece to tell our listeners a little about ourselves and what's on our mind at this moment. I'll start. I'm Stacy Gustafson, and I split my time between Northern Michigan and Southwest Texas, and my major focus is holistic community problem solving. So I'll just move down the line here. Dan Bader, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, I'm Dan Bader. I'm coming from Chicago. I'm in Chicago, and my interests are public health, mental health, abrupt climate change, and COVID-19, bioweapons, vaccinations, etc.
Thank you very much. Marcin, you're next.
Hello, I'm Marcin. I'm a software engineer, and working on mental health for myself, but my focus is inequality typically. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here, Marcin. And Daniel Tweed, you're next.
Hey, Daniel Tweed, KK6BDR on the extra class ham bands. Sometimes candidate for Thousand Oaks City Council, where I reside on Chumash land here in Ventura County, California. And I'm a proponent of what I call the Thousand Earths plan. So from Thousand Oaks to Thousand Earths, this town could be the headquarters, kind of a ministry for the future, if you're familiar with Kim Stanley Robinson latest novel about, and I help host the Indigenous podcast, and I think we can leave half the earth as wild space for animals other than human, and make that happen very soon using distributed computing like the BOINC, the Berkeley Open Infrastructure for Network Computing, and things like Gridcoin. And that's my 30 seconds. I gotta go. Bye.
Thanks, Daniel. That all sounds great. Ramses, you're up next.
Hey guys, my name is Ramses. I'm joining from Montreal, Quebec, Canada. And today was my first day to work from office. Very exhausted, but so interested in this topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cesari, you're up next.
Hello, everyone. Cesari Jurevich, joining you from the outskirts of Chicago. And my main interest is ethics and animal liberation. And I'm eating some delicious non-dairy Archer's Farms strawberry ice cream. So it's good. I highly recommend it. Thank you for having me.
That does look good. Thank you for coming, Cesari. And last but not least, Cynthia, if you'd like to introduce yourself and then go ahead and move right into your presentation, which is MMIWG, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls.
Why, yes, thank you so much. My name is Cynthia Leonard, and I have had a ridiculously good day. I am so happy and so full of love and gratitude. Thank you all so much for coming. I will be sharing a video right now, and I think that's all I wanted to say for right now.
Everyone knows Disney's Pocahontas, a movie that highlights some amazing portrayals of connections to nature, with a strong female protagonist. While inspiring, this was not the case. Pocahontas, also known as Matoaka, in reality was taken from her tribe and held for ransom as a bartering tool by English colonists at just 16 years old. To protect her tribe, she agreed to marry an Englishman as her last effort to keep the peace. She was then stripped of her culture, forced into Christianity, and murdered not long after bearing a child. This disregard for her life can be traced back to the basic prejudice against Indigenous lives, manifesting as a complete disregard for the value of Indigenous lives that the colonizers brought to this land from the beginning. This happened over 400 years ago, yet even now, Indigenous women and girls are still going missing, and not much is being done to stop it. Over 5,500 Indigenous women and girls are missing and murdered in the United States and Canada every year. And more than 84%, 1.5 million Indigenous women experience violence in their lifetimes, because the laws that were set up to govern them reflected those same inhumane attitudes and values which the tribal governments had to abide by. They achieved this by making the tribes both sovereign, meaning they had their own government, and dependent, which means they were also controlled by federal law. Additionally, the U.S. government created barriers preventing justice for crimes committed on tribal land and to tribal citizens, which were hidden in jurisdictions of local, state, federal, and tribal law. Many of these laws are still in use today and directly relate back to what is happening to these women and girls. First, the Major Crimes Act of 1885 mandated that all violent crimes committed on tribal lands were to be prosecuted by the federal government, which means that the U.S. government doesn't need to prioritize the tribe's needs, and that the tribes cannot make decisions without the U.S. government. Then there was Public Law 280 of 1953, which gave partial or total control to the state over tribes within their boundaries. This was a response to the tribes' pleas, but instead of giving control back to the Indigenous people, they gave the states control over their judicial and criminal system. It's important to remember that up until this point, the Indigenous people didn't have a guaranteed right to vote until the 1970s. They had no say over who was in the government that was controlling them. The third law is the Indian Civil Rights Act of 1968. This law states that Native governments cannot prosecute for more than $5,000 in fines and 1 year of jail time a person of their own tribe, even for a violent crime. They can't prosecute a non-Native person at all. They have to hand the case back to the U.S. government. By comparison, the average prison sentence for rape handed down by state or federal courts ranges from 8 to 13 years. This law was eventually combined with a new law called the Tribal Law and Order Act of 2010, which included 7 improvements to the Indian Civil Rights Act. These improvements finally gave Indigenous tribes the ability to prosecute criminals, but only of Indigenous descent. These laws still prevented significant consequences for non-Native perpetrators. While these laws allowed prosecution of non-Native suspects, it still had to be done at the state and federal level, and those courts rarely followed through. As a result, these criminals targeted Indigenous women living in these areas because they knew they could get away with their crimes in those jurisdictions. Because of strict laws preventing high-stakes consequences to non-Native persons, non-Native perpetrators target Indigenous women specifically living in these areas. They know they can get away with their crimes in those jurisdictions. In 2018 alone, the Urban Indian Health Institute reported 5,712 missing Indigenous women and girls, with only 116 of them registered in the DOJ database, while the other 5,596 cases were turned into cold cases. The cases that were registered and transferred to state or federal court took years to get any form of justice, with only that 3-year sentence, the same as a petty crime. Everyone deserves the right to safety. The creation of a better, safer environment and livelihood is important. The U.S. needs to start prioritizing the lives of these women. Tribal jurisdictions need full authority and resources in order to protect their people, and the determination of a crime being fully charged and prosecuted should be the same for non-natives on and off of their lands.
My mother's child dances in darkness and sings heathen songs by the light of the moon, and watches the stars and renames the planets, and dreams she can reach them with a song and a broom. I am my mother's savage daughter, the one who runs barefoot cursing sharp stones. I am my a forth out of darkness into this world through blood and through pain. And deep in our bones, the old songs are waking, so sing them with voices of thunder and rain. We are our mother's savage daughters, the ones who run barefoot, cursing sharp stones. We are our mother.
Thank you very much for that. That is a really powerful video that really sums it all up. We have discussed this issue before and really didn't understand the exact reasoning, how these crimes are happening with the laws. And I think this video just details it perfectly. So thank you very much, Cynthia, for bringing that up. So the floor is open for debate. I always have some comments, but would someone else like to? Cynthia, go ahead.
Well, first, let me say thank you very much. And I also want to mention that I have this idea written up in Truths that we should all know. And I am putting the link to that in the chat in case anybody wants to have a look at it. It essentially says the same thing as the video, but there's some extra information in there and some links if you want to look into it further.
Very good. Thank you. And Marcin has his hand up. Would you like to go?
Thank you, Stacy. So about this video, why is it that we don't hear anything about this at all? Is there some sort of movement, some kind of, some kind of outreach or?
Actually, as I was doing research on this, because they focus their actual research in very specific areas. And in this particular case in the Pacific Northwest, for 126 cases of indigenous women and girls disappearing or murdered, out of 126, only 2 of those were covered, and none of them were covered outside of the area.
Wow.
I apologize so much for laughing when you asked that, Marcin. Why haven't I heard of this? But I laugh because every time we talk about this, that's the response. Nobody knows. And it's such a big deal. And that's just, it's not even the tip of the iceberg of the things we don't know that we weren't told when we were growing up in school. And it just boils my blood. And if I had known this stuff when I was growing up and learning it in school, I'd be a different person. Daniel?
I think that some of this is similar to laws. There's something called, like when the U.S. was intervening in Iraq, there was something called the Status of Forces Agreement, or SOFA, and it basically said that you can't prosecute our guys for crimes they do on your soil. So I if I was trying to figure out how a law like this could come about and be called civil rights, the only thing I can come up with is similar to the sovereign law enforcement kind of status that one nation has with another nation, because they are sovereign nations, even though they can't print their own money or declare war. They're sovereign in any other regard, as far as I recall. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around what was the impetus for this kind of law. It sounds like you get more in trouble for torturing animals or something, so it's like, that's my comment for now.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. And I point to, when you look at what happened to the laws that they were talking about in the video, you got to look at the lawyers and the government, and you know what they were trying to accomplish, and there's no way to hide that. And to continue to stand behind what they've done to the laws, and then to say that they're sovereign nations, it's crazy. It's insanity. Let's see, Ramses has her hand up, and then we have Cesare, and then Cynthia.
Yeah, thank you, Stacy. So this is what happens when you give authority to a bunch of liberals who are just aiming at progressing their agenda, like they are just implementing their agenda, or they are just they want to show people that they care about indigenous people, but they really do nothing other than just patching the law and regulations. And when you talk about, so for example, here in Canada, we have laws for conservation zones. Okay, so just like the video has already explained, when you talk about removing these regulations and implement some laws that that makes everybody equal, you know, whether you are indigenous or not, you find these liberals just screaming and shouting, hey, this will make it worse to indigenous people. They really need protection. So if you have minorities that need protection, then our laws and our regulations should be able to protect minorities, whatever they are, you know, indigenous or racial or color-based or sexuality or whatever. And these tribalistic laws, it's this interesting part. So there are other countries, by the way, other than Canada and in the States, there are other countries that have 2 levels of regulations. Level 1 is based on constitution and bylaws, and level 2 based on what they call tribalistic tradition. But this happens only in Africa and third world countries, where they have a lot of tribes, you know, and the government is so weak that it cannot control the tribes, you know. But here in the States, I guess we are in 2021, so please move on, implement a generic regulations that applies on everybody. Indigenous people have to file their taxes. Indigenous people have to, they are obligated, you know, to respect the law. And at the same time, the law is obligated to protect them and treat them just like any other citizen. That's it.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Ramses. Suzadi, you're next.
Well, so that just goes to show you that Native American nations are sovereign in name only, which basically means they're not sovereign. So, I mean, and then I think we have to call it what it is. They're not. They're colonized. They're pretend states. I mean, come on, let's get real with it. We need to either assimilate all Native Americans or let them be their own separate countries. That's it. Those are the solutions. And this is just one of this problem is just one of the different problems that arises out of that. There are all kinds of other issues, like, you know, with the whole building things on native lands and, you know, that whole thing that was happening with the pipeline. I don't even know about it because I don't really care that much about it. I mean, I have other priorities, but I mean, they don't control their own lands. They're not sovereign. So they either need to have like real sovereignty and have, you know, have independence. Doesn't necessarily mean they have to have an army. That Costa Rica is a sovereign country, but it doesn't actually have an army. Grenada is its own country, but it doesn't have an army. So it doesn't mean that they have to provide for their own defense. Maybe they could still use the US dollar. There are countries around the world that still use the US dollar, actually, or they fix their currency to the US dollar, or they just flat out use the US dollar because it's more reliable than any currency that they can print. They can still use the US dollar, you know, it's available to them. But they either need real independence or assimilate with, you know, with the United States of America. Thank you. I yield.
I agree, Suzadi. Cynthia's next.
Yes, and I would both. Yes, I agree with that. And however, I'm not so sure that assimilation is really the answer, because over the course of my research, what I turned up is that 71% of the indigenous population actually doesn't live on indigenous property. Like they live in urban settings, and 50.2% of those people are women. And it is the third leading cause of death among indigenous women in urban areas is murder. And when you compare that to the, you know, for context, when you compare that to the, you know, nationwide all women, murder is not even on the list of things that kill us. So this is a problem. It's been a problem for a long time. And to speak to sovereignty, you know, they've been using that against the indigenous people since the beginning. You know, sovereignty implies that they would have some recourse if one of their people was murdered outside of their tribe, and yet they do not, even though every other sovereign nation does. So just throwing some of that out there. I encourage everyone to look at the idea, because all of that stuff is in there.
Thank you very much. Thank you for doing all that research, Cynthia. Marcin, you're next. And then Dan Bader.
Hey, Stacy. I just really like it if Ramses supported his, you know, his thoughts a little bit more, because when he says this only happens in liberal states, or this only happens in third world countries, I mean, all of these things are false. It happens in Canada, it happens in China, happens in the US, it happens in Israel with Palestine and Gaza. It happens everywhere. Like, and Israel is a very right-wing conservative country. So like, he really needs to support his facts. That's all I want to say.
And Dan Bader is next, and then Ramses has her effing hand up.
Yeah, so just this one thought. You know, so what I'm hearing is, I think that an unusual number of indigenous women are being disappeared or murdered. And so when I think about that, you know, the thing that comes to my mind is obviously why? Why is that happening? And, you know, and so I think that the reasons why it's happening, I'm not going to put you, I'm going to hear that maybe from you, Cynthia, or Stacy, or someone will, but, you know, whenever I hear there's, you know, a high murder rate, or there's something, people are being kidnapped or disappearing, etc. What my mind goes to is, okay, that's no good, you know, but why? Why is that happening? What are the motivations of the individuals who are perpetrating those actions, etc.? So I'm really curious as to what those underlying reasons are that this is happening, in this case to indigenous, Native, you know, Native American women. So I'm just throwing that out there, and somebody will tell me.
Yeah, Ramses next, and then we can cover that.
Sure, thank you, Stacy. So this is a problem when you debate with a liberal. Like, you are talking about something, you know, and they are thinking about something that is very different, and they cannot cope up with the level, you know, of knowledge that you are presenting here. I'm not talking about anything but tradition, okay? So in law, okay, you as a lawmaker, you simply depend on a number of levels when you make your law, and the judge at the courthouse also uses the same order, okay? So when I studied law in Egypt, for example, the first level was constitution, second level was bylaws. Bylaws state the details, you know, like how much should you pay for a ticket at the courthouse, for example. And then the third level is tradition. Tradition here means that if the crime happens inside a tribe, then you ask them, like you go and ask them, guys, what is the traditional punishment for this? Okay, this is what we mean by tradition. And fourth level is Islam. And this is stated in the law, in the constitution. So now the problem is, this happens a lot in Africa. Like you will find similar laws in Egypt, in Sudan, and in African, like Ethiopia, for example, where they have a lot of tribes, and each tribe has their own conventions when it comes to what is a crime and what is not, and what is a banishment and what is not. These can work like 1,000 years ago, but it doesn't work today, okay, at all. Like, and it cannot be applied for a country like the States, in my opinion. And taking Israel as so Israel doesn't have tradition, by the way. What they have actually is specific laws for Jewish people, like religion-based laws, specific laws that are targeting Jewish people. And this is a problem. And Israeli laws are very bad. Like, they are not an example. Like, what is the point that you are making here? They are not an example. They are not a role models that you should take. And of course, China is not a role model either. You never see this shit in Denmark. You never see this shit in Sweden. You never see it in Norway. You never see it in Germany. In Germany, law applies on everybody. And everybody has to learn German, okay? Everybody has to speak German. And it's the only language available other than the archaic one. Now, my question is, which is a little bit off topic out of this, but my question is, how many non-native people are involved in murder? And when you measure nationwide murder rate, how much of it is related to rural areas? Okay, so I would expect that if I'm living in rural areas, in remote areas, the probability of being murdered is much higher. And now the question is, do we really have a lot of non-natives who just travel all the way to native areas and murder people? And regarding rape, again, and violence against women, how many non-natives are involved in this? Because when it comes to rape, and many people are talking about it, and I know, like, I'm not denying that, of course, there are cases and they should be taken seriously. But at the same time, you should know, my friend, that most of the non-native are not sexually interested in having sex with native. Okay, this is a fact. And these stories that you hear, some of it is authentic, but some of it is just bullshit. That's it for me.
Okay, Cynthia is next, but I just wanted to jump in and answer Dan's question, which Cynthia actually answered in the chat also. The reason why these people are doing it, my understanding is they know that this jurisdictional loophole exists. They can do their murders, their crimes, and there will be absolutely no consequences. And Cynthia said, because the predators know they will get away with their behavior. And Cynthia's next.
Yes, I was actually also going to answer Dan's question. I'm a little confused as to what Ramses is saying. If you could provide me some clarity on that, I would be grateful. I mean, are you saying that we shouldn't be discussing this because it happens everywhere, or what exactly are you saying?
We should be discussing any single case of violence against women, against children, against whoever, right? But what I'm saying here is we should consider all the information. Okay, it's like looking at the general numbers, the general statistics is meaningless, in my opinion, or sometimes it doesn't make sense because it is not representative, okay? Like, for instance, most people live in towns and cities. So most of the murder cases will be in rural areas. And as Stacy already mentioned, of course, when you have a conservative area with these stupid laws, then yeah, I would expect people, predators, someone who is into cannibalism, for example, would like to live there, kill people, eat them, and hallelujah, you are not criminalized by any means. So this is what I'm asking here, like is the specifics. How many white are involved? How many black are involved? How many natives are involved in these crimes? And for rape, I need to get numbers about how many natives do rape other natives and how many non-natives do really rape natives for all genders. That's it for me.
Okay, thank you. We have Dan Bader next and then Marcin.
All right, so the answer that to the question I put out there, so I still, you know, I do understand the logic of if I can go there and for some reason or a set of reasons, I'm motivated to murder somebody or rape and murder somebody. I'm still curious as to what is motivating that person to rape and or murder. Clearly, if you think you can get away with it, but what is the underlying motivation? And the other thing that I've discovered, you know, dealing with the violence in Chicago or other areas, a lot of the, and it has nothing to do particularly with what race, what ethnicity or anything, but often it's very frequent that the environment that somebody is raised in and the usage of alcohol in particular is involved in so many of these kinds of crimes. In other words, you take the alcohol out of the equation in many violent situations, whether it's violence of the nature we're talking about right now, or it's violence that occurs at sporting events, you know, soccer games, etc. You take the alcohol away and the violence is greatly reduced. And most of the child sexual abuse, the physical abuse, the domestic violence is got alcohol in the equation. And when I used to work, and I worked with a lot of people in communities in Chicago where you got a lot of violence of all kinds. And believe me, the alcohol is a big factor. It doesn't mean that the people aren't prone anyway to violence in certain contexts. But, you know, if you're drinking alcohol, alcohol takes away anxiety and shame, guilt. That's why people like alcohol. So if you don't have anxiety or shame, guilt, you're not thinking of consequences and you're highly motivated by whatever you're feeling, then you can go and that can be translated into violence. So I just, you know, I think that I would want to know, in terms of the actual criminological statistics, who are these perpetrators and what is it, you know, both in terms of, you know, as they say, the distal cause, what is it, you know, some time ago that made them the way they are? And then what is the proximal, you know, the nearby stimulus, which oftentimes is alcohol, people are drinking. And that's, you know, so I just wanted to raise that up and would be curious to know what the statistics are in terms of alcohol or any other factors that motivate these people to take advantage of the fact they think they can get away with it. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't do it, maybe. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Next is Marcin and then Cynthia.
Okay, kind of lowered my hand, but I kind of did want to reply back to Dan and Ramses on the statistics. It seems like what everybody's trying to say is that this is a pretty straightforward case. It's been analyzed that these laws in particular are causing the majority of these actions. So looking into statistics on certain aspects of motivation is just kind of blurring the picture, I think. So that's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Marcin. Cynthia?
I was going to say something else, but I'd like to address what Ramses said in the chat. We need to have the real information in order to be able to deal with it. Well, that's all well and good. Unfortunately, we didn't even keep records on what was happening with these people because they were considered less than in our society. And even when we did start keeping records, they were misidentified as non-Native Americans, if you can believe that, or Black people. So there are no records, and quite frankly, I was lucky to find the precious little bit of research that I could. And every time somebody starts talking about creating records and doing the research, well, you know, suddenly there's no money for that, but we have money to inflict all this damage. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ramses, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with you, Cynthia. I think I was not very accurate. I would say we need to have like the most accurate information, you know. We will never have perfect information, but this is how detectives, for example, work, right? They don't have all the information, but they need to search. And again, so for instance, Cynthia, this is one of the cases, for example, that I would prefer to critically think about it. You shared a post on Facebook before, and the post was written by a native who was talking about his father, okay? And he posted a photo for his father with a nun at the school, like nun and two kids. One of the kids was a father. And the kid, the poster, the writer of the post is saying that his father was raped a lot in the school, and that it was like something that happens every night, you know, like the priest would go into the bedroom, choose which victim, okay, I'm gonna rape today, and do it. And what is not logical here about this? Like, I'm not denying that they have been raped, you know, I'm not denying this. And I myself have been abused, you know, and I really feel what they are talking about. But at the same time, critical thinking is important. Like, not everything that people say are truth. So do you think that the priest will be sexually interested in all the children, in all of them? Like, you are like, imagine if you were a pedophile, you are gonna be interested in all the kids. If you are straight, are you interested in all women? And sexual interest is very important here, because if you are raping kids, their vaginas are very tight, and their sorry for the word, but their anuses are very tight as well. So you're not doing anything other than masturbating in that case, right? So we need to know this information.
Oh my goodness. I just have to jump in here and say there are, there are terrible ways that children are abused by adults, and it has nothing to do with the size of their orifices. And I believe that was my post, and they said that the children were plucked regularly every night. They did not say every single child experienced that. That's my response to that, Ramses. And Sazadi has his hand up next.
Wow, Ramses, thanks for putting that image into people's minds. But anyways, geez, I am curious about what's up with all these women, Native American women, getting killed outside of the reservations. But at the same time, I do want to propose an idea. It's an idea that has been getting a lot of support in Egora, but not from everyone here. It's an idea for the decolonization of the world. I think we have to move towards giving people real sovereignty if that's what they wanted. So I want to share that idea in the chat. It's idea 697. And I'm going to read that for you real quick. Decolonization of the world. The world in which we currently live is the product of societies warring, conquering, and colonizing one another for millennia. As such, there are thousands of nations and ethnic groups that are under the rule and domination of other groups, pressed into societies to which they do not wish to belong. To correct for this injustice, we must recognize that all nations of people are entitled to self-determination and sovereignty over their own lands, regardless of their oppressors' overwhelming size. Therefore, we must release from our modern empire states the lands owned by the members of any nation numbering at least 4,600 people for their own self-rule. However, in order to prevent the creation of inefficient borders, the lands to be released must be contiguous and not create any enclaves. So, anyways, that's an idea. The number for 4,600 is rather arbitrary, but it is kind of reasonable. If you want to reduce it to 4,500, okay, I'd be still down with that. Maybe 2,300, maybe 23, maybe 23 people should be able to create their own nations. I don't know how practical that is, but I don't think it's very practical. It's that number 4,600 is arbitrary, but you could, if you look at the current micronations that are still thriving around the world, actually, I think some of the smallest ones are like 10 to 20,000 people. So it will be very difficult to actually build a country in a micronation. Well, there's Pitcairn. I think that place is only like 200-300 people, but Pitcairn isn't really trying. It's not really trying to be. It's, you know, like a sophisticated society. So it's. I think from what I understand, it's a bunch of like people just vacationing there long term. But I could be misrepresenting Pitcairn. It is. I think they. Yeah. Anyways, so whatever that number is, I'm flexible with that. But that's the idea that's getting a lot of traction. So I would like to solicit all your support for that idea. It's in the chat. Thank you. I yield.
Marcin wrote in the chat, we should stick with the topic at hand. And next up is Daniel. I'm not sure if Ramses had her hand up before Daniel or not. You guys want to duke it out?
Sure, Daniel can go next. I have a comment on Cesari's comment. So Daniel can go next and then I'll go after.
Yeah, my comment is sort of germane to Cesari's decolonization idea. And I think he's correctly identifying a lot of the root of this problem is an artificial subjugation of land use that's been imposed over millennia. And this could be easily solved with the Henry George land value tax idea, which actually should be actively supported because it would perfectly incentivize the ability to create fluid, intentional communities of any size. But if all land you merely had to pay an annual use fee, at market auction rates, and the current owners would have priority on renewing their lease on the land, paid like a 10% rental fee to the community, you could see all kinds of amazing groupings of like-minded people into peaceful voluntary communities. And the current system of land titles is just fraught with all kinds of coercive invalid contracts. The papal bull, the doctrine of discovery, basically said if you see a non-Christian, you can kill them, take their stuff, do whatever you want with them. The idea of just my father fought for this land, and therefore it's mine for all time. His parents fought and his parents fought. And then the people might say, well, hey, tell you what, we'll fight you for it. How's that fair? So check out the Henry George land value tax idea. It basically has been supported by all the greatest minds from Moses to Einstein throughout history. And you don't need to do these half-assed decolonization government-imposed solutions. They would work just great if you just educate yourself. I yield.
Okay, Ramses, go ahead.
So it's very related to the topics that we are discussing. And I would actually take it to practical implementation level. I would start with decolonizing one of the tribes, okay? Let's say, for example, the Eskimo in the north. I would ask them whether they want to separate or not. If majority says yes, for example, or if a group of people says yes, then we can give them the land and let them establish their independent country. But what is gonna be the result? Okay, like after 3 years or 4 years, you're gonna see a flux of refugees coming back to Canada. Okay, like please, we are persecuted. We are not treated well. So that's the problems that I'm talking about here. If they are eating themselves by themselves, then this means that they also have a problem. Okay, they need to change and they need to get rid of their tribalistic beliefs about law or about punishment or about crime. Okay, but if, in my opinion, if they really stick to it, then we shouldn't accept any immigrant from there, to be honest, because it is not our problem anymore. And again, that's why I'm asking, how many whites are involved in violence against women, against indigenous women? Like I'm trying to imagine, for example, some guy here from Montreal would travel to a reservation and would find a woman, an indigenous woman, and just slap her on the hand. Like what is actually happening? Because logically, I would say that most or many indigenous women are actually being abused by indigenous men because they are living, you know, like 1,000 years backward than other people.
Marcin, go ahead.
Ooh, I don't know if I should be mean or not, but that sounded very bigoted. Like without any actual facts to support it, you're just basically saying that everybody's a barbarian except for you. You're much better than everybody else. At the same time, you're also an immigrant that came from a sovereign country that immigrated into Canada, and you're not going to allow other people to immigrate to another country. Like, I just don't understand logic like that. Thank you.
Ramses, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, sure. Do you know what barbarian means? So the Greeks used to use this word in order to describe the tribes that are living in North Africa, which Egyptians used to call Libyan or Nahsil. Okay, and these tribes do not have organized country. They are just divided, split into groups. Each group had its leader, okay, and they have their, you know, laws and all this kind of stuff. Okay, it's purpose or barbarian or whatever, like any word that tries to apply the same meaning actually applies on indigenous people who are sticking to their traditions. Okay, yes, their traditions. This is the truth, my friend. Unfortunately, their traditions are barbarian if they are compared to our advanced laws and regulations. Okay, our regulations here in North America are very advanced, okay? And human rights, we have fought for human rights for ages and ages. I'm not saying that we are the best, but be logical when you compare between a tribe that has no meaning of human rights or women rights, okay? And yes, Cynthia, I'm sorry, but yeah, I agree that I agree with the fact that there are many tribes that really consider women as holy, okay, according to their beliefs and blah blah blah. However, what I'm talking about here, like you would never have a civilized a country, okay, or civilized people without law, without rigorous law, okay? And that's how the Egyptian civilization worked. Like to them, having written law was the most important thing, and writing or scribing is the highest profession. And in Assyria, of course, Hammurabi laws or regulations, they are considered the earliest constitution that talks about human rights and animal rights, okay? So what I'm talking about here is if we give them the land, okay, are they gonna come up with constitutions that state clearly that everybody is not obligated to have a specific belief or religion, and that women have the right to go to school, to do whatever they want, to live alone, to have sex with whoever they want, etc.? Do you think that they will achieve that? That's what I'm asking.
Marcin, is your hand up? Would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, I would. So I just want to, repeat what you said in chat, Stacy, that advanced is subjective. So it's civilized. So are all of those terms. Like, I don't think when Canada killed, hundreds of Indigenous children, that was very advanced or civilized. I don't think Israel forcing all their citizens to go into the military is advanced or civilized. I don't think the way they treat Palestinians is advanced or civilized.
Sorry, are you talking about America treating Palestinians?
What? No, the way that, well, that too, but the way that Israel treats Palestinians.
I didn't say that Israel's regulations are advanced by any means. They are just bullshit.
All I'm saying is that all of these cultures bring old religions over, the same thing that tribes do. It's the fact that they have maybe a gun instead of a stick makes them no more or less civilized than the other one.
I'm calling for a hot debate. And sorry, Cesare. I know.
Marcin, would you like to partake in the hot debate-o? You have the right.
I just really feel like this is taking away from the topic at hand. I'd really like to focus on the women that are getting killed and raped.
Okay, well, if we're not going to do the hot debate-o, I believe it's time for closing remarks, unless somebody had a last remark that they really want to get in there. Raise your hand now or forever hold your peace. All right, let's move into
Marcin, I think it's up to you to stay on topic. If somebody gives you the bait to go after something else and you take it, that's on you. That's not the other person.
Wow, this is really a Thunderdome tonight. All right, let's go into closing remarks. And Marcin, would you like to lead us off?
Yeah, sure. So Cesare, you're 100% correct, but I just can't stand by when somebody keeps saying bigoted things without any kind of evidence to support it. This is a very important topic, and I'm really glad Cynthia brought it up. I really hope, these laws could be changed and, a solution can come about, but it's hard to see what the correct solution is at this time. All right, Great topic, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcin, for your comments and attendance. Really appreciate it. Daniel Tweed, or Ramses, did you want to go next and reply?
Well, I can give my closing remarks.
Sure.
Okay. So I would say, of course, very important topic. I would care about every single person who is being persecuted or abused by whoever. And this should be done under the power of law. As Cesare has mentioned, there are two solutions here. Either have generic regulations and assimilation. Okay, this is one solution. The other solution is give them the land. And if we are gonna implement the first solution, then indigenous people have to cooperate with us and they have to assimilate. They have to use English or French here in Canada if they want. And we are not gonna, like, it's impossible to create, you know, like to create a law that works in 100 languages. And again, education and Western values should be applied on all people, not because they are beautiful. No, okay, so if 71% considers themselves assimilated, this is great, of course, this is great information. And actually many, like I have never met an indigenous people that doesn't speak English. I have never met an indigenous people, an indigenous person that is not educated. Like most of the indigenous people now are educated and they speak English very well. So in my opinion, we should give assimilation a try. And at the same time, again, stop these stupid liberal communist solutions that do not target the core of the problem, okay? And have one law, one generic law, just like Islam, one law that applies on all people. The difference here is that for Islam, you kill other people, so it applies on Muslims. But here, you include all people and you apply a law that works with all people. This is very possible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Daniel Tweed, you're up next.
Henry David Thoreau once said, there are 1,000 hacking at the branches of evil to one who is hacking at the root. The root of this problem is that we are stewards of a fragile spaceship going through space. If we were on a lifeboat, you wouldn't let people do whatever they want, drill holes in the lifeboat, you know, pick it apart. The Native American, Indigenous, First Nations people did not have a system of monopoly property ownership. They stewarded the land. They realized they were part of nature. We have an illusion that we're separate from nature and that we can dominate it. We have religious systems that teach domination, separateness of nature. This is coming to a crisis point. It's past a crisis point, and now we have a cataclysm of indifference. And we all need to treat the spaceship like a lifeboat and become stewards of it. That's my comment. Thanks.
Well said, Daniel. Thank you very much. Love that. Cesare, you're next.
So the situation is a bit complicated with communities like Native Americans as opposed to, like, let's say Palestinians or the Kurds, because those people, well, actually, I don't even know that much about the Kurds or the Palestinians, but it seems like the Palestinians and the Kurds, they're pretty well familiar with the concept of a nation state. Actually, a nation, a group of people that administers over a certain land that they control and develop and take responsibility for and protect and so on. Now, the Native Americans, I don't think they had that much of a concept. They were just a group of people living on an open land that kind of belonged to everybody. They didn't, I don't think they have that much. I mean, they probably had their own concept of territory. Like this is the land where our people like move around and live, but they didn't have that focus of like, these are our borders. And so it was a much more fluid concept. So the solution, you know, I don't know if the Native Americans would actually really want their own nation state. Maybe they do. maybe, I mean, basically they were in the Stone Age when the Europeans arrived, and if they had progressed onto the other ages, so yeah, they are not advanced technologically as the Europeans when they came. But so if they wanted to advance and build societies, like in the other, with the advanced ages that we have, with the advanced technology, then maybe they would be interested in building a nation state. But maybe some of them aren't interested in that. Maybe some of them just want to live in the wild, and where there is no concept of basically back in the Stone Age. Maybe some of them actually want to live in the Stone Age technology, and they don't actually want to administer like a government and administer over a specific land. So that solution, sovereignty, might not be necessarily a solution. So there might be more than one choices. Like one is to have them build their own nation, independent nation state. Another choice might be for them to just assimilate and by assimilation, I mean live within the governance structure of the United States, of maybe having some of the territories that they have, the reservations, actually turn them into states, legally recognized states with senators and so on. That's what I mean by assimilation. It's not so much about language and culture, it's about the political structure and integration into the rest of our system. So maybe some of them want that, and maybe some of them want independent countries, and maybe some of them actually, maybe we should create a territory where basically there are no laws. There are no laws except for the people who organize within. And it's the law of the spear, or whatever the Stone Age technology is, but it would be an area that's forever preserved for whoever lives there to just live in the Stone Age era. Obviously that would have to be mining would be the essential thing to prevent any development that takes people out of the Stone Age and into the next ages. So that's another consideration, is creating basically like a preserve of the wild where there are no laws except for just maintaining the territory always in the Stone Age. So maybe that's what some of the Native Americans would want, actually just go back to living in the Stone Age in a protectorate. But anyways, I have ideas in my ideological profile about all of that. So decolonization and creating a territory called the wild. Check it out. I yield. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cesare. And Daniel Bader is next.
Yeah, so again, a interesting discussion topic. And I just would say, to me, the United States, theoretically, is a pretty good kind of conceptual framework for people living together. It's always been seen theoretically as a melting pot. In other words, you could come from whatever country, whatever culture, and be assimilated into the system. And, for lots of groups, that's worked really well. For other groups, for example, ones who were, let's say, originally transported over here into a slavery system, there's some differences there. And for the Native Americans, who essentially, there were lots of, and I'm not an expert at it, but I'm, there were a lot of tribes. They spoke different languages. They had similar cultures in some ways, in different, depending on where they were geographically located. They were not necessarily friendly tribes. It's kind of inherent with tribalism that there could be warfare or conquering and so on. But it seems to me that, for the Native American population, they ought to be able to assimilate. And I think based on people of Indian heritage that I've known, very few, but, I have known some, they seem very well assimilated into the American system. And again, but the the brutalities that take place that were being talked about and referred to, in the beginning. Again, it's important, I think, to understand the reasons that underlie those acts of, whether it's rape, murder, et cetera, and to be able to look at the causes and then do what's necessary once you've figured out what the causes are to rectify that. And I'm perfectly okay, if a group of people feel more comfortable, they just want to live themselves somewhere. I don't know that it's a great idea, but I'm comfortable with that. But everybody should have the opportunity of being, again, to me, the American Constitution, which was evolved off of some very oppressive systems that used to exist in Europe, whether it was a monarchy, that kind of thing, feudalism. It's a big upgrade, and it's theoretically it can work pretty well. So anyway, those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for attending, Dan. And my comments are, why don't we know this? I ask everybody to get out there and tell people what you learned tonight if you didn't know it, because why don't we know it? So I hope that we can get the word out and understand these things better. And there is a lot to understand about the way the laws and all this developed. And we talk about assimilating Native Americans into our system, but in order to assimilate, then they have to sign on to the insanity of our world. And I think that we should instead move closer to what they had originally and their traditions, which are balanced and don't destroy the planet. So thank you all very much. And for our viewers and listeners, if you liked this idea, don't forget to support it in egorailp.org. Also in Egora, you will find information for our upcoming meetings. And finally, like our page and join our group, Citizen Assembly, on Facebook.